So, Warhammer's not doing so good, is it? Like, from the logo change to the shitty ass lore being added to things just going downhill ever since GW reignited that fan animation purge that happened way back in 2018 with, Warhammer fan content just being flat out removed or banned by the company. That kind of stuff. And ever since then, sort of Warhammer's never been the same. Let's just say that it's kind of getting worse now, and it's kind of killing off my enjoyment for the IP. So, with that being said, what do I do now? I could always just fight back against the evil company that's making these miniatures. Well, GW doesn't care, and second of all, they are a multi-million-dollar corporation, and I doubt boycotting them is going to be enough to stop them because, well, they're kind of smart in ways where they get rid of the fans that they don't want and replace them with fans who would eat up anything Warhammer. You know? Like, there are people who are subscribed to Warhammer Plus, which I'm not, and I'm probably never going to because I'm not going to pay for something that's a giant ass paywall of Warhammer content. But lo and behold, there are people who are subscribed to that, and I don't want to shame people who are subscribed to that kind of stuff, but I mean, GW's kind of got you in the chokehold, and you're spending your money on something that you don't need to be spending it on, and so on and so forth. So then, what do we do as Warhammer fans? Do we gatekeep and boycott a setting that basically cannot be gatekeeped or boycott because the massive company can just outsource it to other people and get outsiders into it, something that they want and will try to do? Or do we look for other settings that aren't horribly messed up like Star Wars, like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, or, well, any other setting you can think of? Well, my friends, I'm here to tell you that indeed there are settings out there that are just like Warhammer, but without the whole evil GW Corporation stuff added onto it. So, in order to determine which of these replacement settings is good, I have created a tier list. And I've basically scoured online and across the lands of the digital world to give you every single Warhammer replacement that I could find and basically tell you which ones you should get into and which ones you shouldn't get into. Basically consider this as your definitive guide of what Warhammer replacement will work and which ones won't. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, here's the tier list. Here's all the settings I could find, and let's go over which ones I think are good replacements and which ones I think are not so good replacements. Starting off, we got the two probably most obvious ones and the ones that probably caught most people's eyes when looking at this. Warhammer Age of Sigmar and Warhammer Fantasy. They're essentially the fantasy versions of 40K. And to be honest, I think I prefer Warhammer Fantasy out of the three Warhammer settings. Like, it's leagues better than Age of Sigmar and somewhat better than Warhammer 40K, but then again, it's only because GW hasn't been paying that much attention to it, which, I mean, why would they? I mean, that setting didn't really make them a lot of money. It would have if they didn't kill it off when Total War came out with those Total War fantasy, because then they probably would have made loads of money. The same way that the Fallout show made people want to play Fallout more, that kind of stuff. But lo and behold, leave it to GW to kill something off just before something popular could have ended up saving it. Like, in a way, like I also prefer like Warhammer Fantasy's lore because they easily could have made it just another bland attempt at a fantasy setting, but they went with a lot of interesting historical stuff, like mixing in Egyptian real life, like a little bit of real life Egyptian history with the undead mummy aspect of the Tomb Kings, or the fact that they have Aztec lizard people and so on and so forth. They even could have made the Empire like Bretonia, where they're just a generic medieval setting, but they went as far as to make them a Renaissance type faction with cannons and muskets and guns and all that other stuff, which I find really, really interesting. Unfortunately, though, if I'm gonna have to rank Age of Sigmar in the same light, its lore is kind of just like whatever, but there's not really a lot there, hence why I'd probably consider it to be the worst of the three. At least Warhammer 40K and Fantasy have already established their settings and have so much going on in them, whereas Age of Sigmar was kind of just rushed because it was after the events of the End Times, which the End Times was bad, to be honest. Like they would make Rise of Skywalker look like tame in comparison to the lore retcons and the destruction it did to the Warhammer Fantasy fan base. And it was probably a sign to the 40K fans of the kind of shit GW is willing to do to other IPs that they own. So, with that being said, if I'm gonna rank this, I'm gonna put Age of Sigmar in C tier. It's not bad or worse or anything. Like, on the one hand, I do like the miniatures. I haven't played any Age of Sigmar games yet, but I think I would enjoy them a lot from the stuff I've seen. And I don't think it's worse than Warhammer in that aspect. It's or Warhammer 40K in that aspect. It's just that like lore wise, it's not really that good, and not to mention it's built off the back of like one of the worst written stories I think GW has ever made to end off a setting. So I'm gonna put it in C tier. It's all right, but it could be better. Warhammer Fantasy, I feel like it's gonna go in B tier because once again, I think it's the best out of the three Warhammer settings, but it's also owned by GW. Both these are, so I guess if you want to downgrade them a bit more, I could have put them in the D or F because GW owns them and GW is already doing some lore retcon shit with Warhammer Fantasy and all this other stuff. But in terms of Warhammer replacements, or Warhammer 40K replacements, if you want like the fantasy version of Warhammer but don't want to deal with like GW's crap and all that other stuff, then yeah, this probably wouldn't be a bad choice to pick, you know? It's perfect if you want something that's really like Warhammer, but at the same time, like GW owns it. So on one hand, you're pretty much playing it because 10th edition kind of sucks and you just want to have fun with the setting. But on the other hand, like GW still owns it and they can still retcon shit. So it's only gonna be a matter of time before these settings just become as bad as 40K. But for now, they're pretty okay. Okay, next up we got Grimdark Future. Oh boy, I have some feelings on this setting. So to keep it real simple, Grimdark Future is kind of just a ripoff of Warhammer 40K, which I mean, I know it sounds like an insult, which I mean it kind of is, but I mean compared to like Warhammer 40K, where like the lore retcons and stuff, I guess you can say Grimdark Future is a good replacement. But my problem with Grimdark Future is that's too much like 40K. Like, there's only so much you can do with a ripoff, I feel like. It's like telling a Star Wars fan who obviously, for good reason, hates Disney. I know I used to be a Star Wars fan, I despise Disney with a burning passion, hence why I got into Warhammer and all this other stuff. But it's like telling a Warhammer 40K fan to get into Grimdark Future instead of GW is like telling a Star Wars fan to get into Spaceballs instead of like Star Wars or the expanded universe or any of that stuff. Like, there's only so much fun you can have with a rip-off setting before you honestly wish you were playing the original. Not to mention half the factions are just like the same old like 40K factions, but with like different names and all this other stuff. Like, you got the Havoc gods who are just the Chaos gods, and probably the worst example are the Eldar replacements, literally called elves. You literally have the High Elves, you have the Dark Elves, which is from Warhammer Fantasy, so that's more ripping off Warhammer Fantasy. Just like to me, if you want like a fun like 40K game that's like where you can just have fun or just play it without like having to deal with like rule fuckery from the newer books and all this other stuff, then yeah, you can play Grimdark Future. But lore-wise, it's just horrible. So I know that there are gonna be some people probably gonna be mad for me putting it here, but I'm gonna have to say F tier. I'm sorry. Like, I can't with Grimdark Future. If they were more like had more of an original style to them, and you'll see that with the other war games I'm going to be looking at into this tier list, I would have liked them more, but the fact that they just decided, nope, we're gonna rip off Warhammer 40K and roll with it. It just shows like the attempt of originality these people had. Because it's not really that hard to be original. You just need to like around stuff. It's the difference from taking inspiration from something and just ripping it off. And Grimdark Future didn't even try with that, so it's F tier for me. Dead Zone, Firefight, Warpath, whatever you want to call it. This setting is actually like Grimdark Future, but if it was actually interesting, in my opinion, because the lore is essentially like space corporations, like in the stars, conquering the galaxy, and there's like multiple different alien races. It's kind of like if 40K and Star Wars kind of made a setting with very Outer Worlds type stuff. Explaining this really, really horribly, but if you read the lore, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. If you take those three and mix them together, then I feel like you'd get Dead Zone and Warpath. So some of the positives I have with this setting is their factions. Like the GCPS is essentially the big corporate like entity that like lurks over this universe. And if you're wondering what GCPS stands for, it stands for Galactic Co-Prosperity Sphere, which is the main like corporation that runs everything. They also have a little shadow council that runs stuff. There are also other factions I could mention, like the Forge Fathers, who are space dwarves. So sort of like the Squats, but if they're done right, I would say. They also have the Vermin, who are space Skavens. So if you like the Skaven from Warhammer Fantasy, but the space version of that, the Vermin are a pretty good choice. Oh, but what about Grimdark Future and the Ratmen? Well, the Ratmen are kind of just a whatever faction, and besides, like, Dead Zone has like their own models for this stuff, whereas like Grimdark Future, I've barely seen any like Ratmen models like at all for it. So yeah, that's why it's an F tier, you know? It has all these interesting concepts, but it does nothing with them. That's how I feel about Grimdark Future. But back to Warzone slash Dead Zone. It has like multiple different games and so much lore. I've made a playlist on my channel about the Dead Zone lore. But that's the things that some of the things I like about some of the things I don't like about it is like how the play it looks way more confusing than per se like Warhammer like Warhammer is, because they have this weird like hexagon like okay,
Board.
sorry, Future Behood Files here. I just found out that the board for Warpath actually looks normal and all this other stuff. I don't know where I got the idea of it having a hexagonal like board came from. So yeah, like for gameplay wise, I think Warpath would function pretty much similar to Warhammer in a way. So yeah, sorry for that little bit of confusion. If you saw that and then looked at the actual Warpath board and were like, where's all the hexagons I'm talking about, you know? It just looks really complicated and stuff, so I guess like in terms of like gameplay, you're probably gonna have more of a worse time playing it than you would like 40K wise, if that makes sense. Like it just looks really, really complicated to get into, but I'm pretty sure like after playing a few games, you get used to it. In my opinion, this is a pretty solid replacement. Oh, sorry. We got jump scared by the screen. Okay, there we go. It's a pretty solid replacement in my opinion. So, but it's not really the best, I would say. So I think it's either a B tier or an A tier. I'd personally put it in probably like a B tier, just because of some of those setbacks about like the board and maybe like the fact that it still takes inspiration from 40K, because there's some factions like the Marauders who are just the orcs from 40K. So I guess like originality wise, it doesn't really have that going either, but it's still a massive improvement over Grimdark Future, and I'll probably still get into it and like play a few games of it. So overall, I think it's pretty good, you know, pretty good setting. Oh boy, the mother of tabletop controversies. We got Trench Crusade. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a very specific word that I know some people really do not like to hear. For obvious reasons, of course, because I feel like just like the words like racist, fascist, trans and all this other like words and stuff. It's just been an abused word that that political people use to like clout chase and all this other stuff. And it's honestly to the point where it's kind of just annoying when you hear people say it. But in the case of this one, I think it's kind of valid. But Trench Crusade's woke, I guess. I don't know. Like, the word woke is a pretty abused word, and a lot of people use the word on things that aren't really low woke when you look at them. But in the case of Trench Crusade, like the way that the developers have been acting to their words, their game, is kind of well, I mean, just see for yourself. Go watch the Gamza video or the Arch video if you want to know what I'm talking about. But there's more that I have problems with Trench Crusade besides it being woke. So I'll get into some of my other problems that I have with Trench Crusade with the lore. Now, I like Trench Crusade as a concept, like 1800s, like World War One style stuff mixed in with like the Holy War, like medieval stuff. It's cool. Like it has an interesting aesthetic, and the art for the game is also pretty awesome. I think the artist, like Mike Francina, I think that's his name, the artist who makes like the art for Trench Crusade, did a really good job. And I mean, he's a concept artist for a lot of big video games and all this other stuff. So, you know, of course, he's gonna do a phenomenal job with the art, but I think it really does a good job at capturing the world. And the lore is kind of hit or miss for me because on one hand, like the lore is like cool and fun and like grimdark and all this other stuff. But on the other hand, there's so much contradictions in the lore sometimes. And some things I feel like just exist to basically go, oh wow, that's a cool thing about Trench Crusade, even though it's like not important. Like for instance, did you know that Trench Crusade is giant like robot mechs that the church uses to defend the Holy Lands against their enemies? No? Well, you wouldn't know that if you wouldn't have read the lore and all this other stuff, but apparently in the background of the new Antioch armored soldier, I'll show an image of him. That giant rusting thing in the background you'll see, that's the giant robot. And I think I'll show some other images of the robot. But yeah, it's not even brought up in the lore, so it's like, what's the point of adding that if like it's not doing anything for the lore other than the fact that like, oh, it's another giant robot mech, like that's fighting demons, like we've never gotten that before. 40K Doom, you know? And then there's also like the factions. Some of them I like, some of them I don't like. Like there's six factions. I'll go over all of them and like some of the things I like. Like um the Heretic Legions are fine. I found like the followers of Mammon to be the most interesting due to the fact that they're covered like in gold and like they take stuff off the battlefield and they just look cool. And I like their personality trait of wandering mercenaries who just want to collect more things, even if they're gonna murder people to get that. It just was like an interesting take on this villainous faction to have like them be greedy and stuff. And I think it was like a unique like sub faction of the Heretic Legions. Aside from that, they're pretty fine. You got some Heretic Legion forces who look interesting, others that don't really look that cool and all that stuff. So I'm gonna have to like say they're good. Um, who else? Oh yeah, the French Pilgrims, they're fine. They're sort of like the biggest like Christian stereotype of this like zealous, faithful horde of warriors going in and just killing everything. But I mean, they're whatever. They're supposed to be based on more of those medieval like peasant mob things or the People's Crusades kind of stuff, rather than actually be based on like Christian stuff. So it's not like all Christians are like this in the Trench Crusade universe. It's just the really weird and fanatical like villagers going on a crusade because their priest told them to or something. Then you got the Iron Sultanate, which I think is the only Trench Crusade faction that I actually found interesting because like I feel like a lot of like Islamic stuff in a lot of media just boils down to like them like throwing like the radical terrorist organizations instead of like interesting like historical Islamic militaries because I feel like Islam has a lot of unique like militaristic like empires and all this other stuff that other fictional universes could explore but they never get the chance to. And Trench Crusade kind of does the opposite of that. It has a lot of like the Iron Sultanate of the Great Iron Wall is very unique due to the fact that they take inspiration from like the Ottomans and like other medieval like Islamic forces like the House of Wisdom, but like they create like mutant Frankenstein monsters or the Assassins of the Mountain, but like they're superhuman armored assassins who use the literal blood of basilisks to poison their enemies. You know, that kind of stuff. It's just like takes a lot of more inspiration from like Islamic historical stuff rather than just like the stereotypical stuff, which I found a bit interesting. Then you got the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent, who I thought was the coolest out of the three demonic factions because, you know, they're like demons who, like demonic overlords who like come to Earth and lead most of the battles and have squabbles with each other, and also the fact that they look so fucking cool. The Black Grail is kind of just Nurgle, but more grotesque, so I guess I'll give them effort for, you know, taking a Warhammer faction and making them more grody, but I mean, it's not really doing that much. I could really never vibe with the Black Grail. They're kind of just like holy demonic zombies and all this other stuff. And then there's New Antioch, which the more I think about New Antioch, I think they're probably the worst Trench Crusade faction. Because on one hand, like New Antioch's a real city. Well, it's called Antioch, not New Antioch in our world, but in the world of Trench Crusade, it's called New Antioch because old Antioch got blown up by a bunch of demons or something. I guess they rolled out the whole nuke and just Hiroshima the shit out of like Antioch. And like from there, like the lore for it is very like like New Antioch is very weird in my opinion because like on the Trench Crusade map, which in my opinion isn't a very good map, like you can just tell that they're trying to milk more lore from it. Because when I looked at the map, I saw like, oh, there's a Golden Khanate, or oh, there's all this other stuff, and it's like they're just trying to add more factions, all this other stuff, rather than focus on the gritty, grim darkness of the world. In my opinion, which I mean is fine. Like world building is not bad to do. It's just that when you've built up this world of like hell is winning and like humanity's on the verge of extinction and that kind of stuff, and you show the map and the territory that hell owns is way, way more smaller than the actual humans, then you can't really say your setting's a bleak and hopeless one now, can you? But back to New Antioch, it just feels like a missed opportunity and a horrible strategic advantage when you look at like the Christian side of things, because the Christians want to keep the forces of hell out of Europe, because if hell's forces take over Europe, then they're going to kill everything. So why fortify a random city in the Middle East that's literally like next door neighbors to the Iron Sultanate when you're gonna leave like your main coastline to Greece and Europe unguarded, or maybe there are guards there, I don't know, but like it feels like to me at least if the demonic forces were smart, they could muster up an invasion force to invade Greece and then the Balkans and then Eastern Europe and so on and so forth and carve out a nice little chunk of Europe, you know? But they don't do that because I guess the demonic followers are stupid or something and all the other stuff. I feel like if they wanted to go with like the holy like city on its last stand, they could do Constantinople because in the world of like Trench Crusade, the whole like fall of humanity and like the world happens like during like the Crusades, or the beginning years of the Crusades, where after the Crusaders took Jerusalem, the forces of hell, like they found demonic artifacts. The forces of hell corrupted the Templars, and they summoned a portal into Jerusalem, which destroyed all of Jerusalem. Like Jerusalem's gone. It looks like the intro from Doom Eternal, you know, with all the demons and stuff. That's Jerusalem now. I just feel like because Constantinople didn't fall when like the Crusades like started. It fell, I think, after the Crusades, because then the Ottomans got enough power to then invade Constantinople and turn it into Istanbul or whatever. And so in this timeline, Constantinople is still probably owned by the Christians. So if I was the Christian forces and I didn't want the demonic forces touching Europe, why not just fortify like Constantinople instead? and instead of the city of New Antioch, it's the city of Constantinople. You seeing what I'm getting at here? Because then they're gonna have to breach through that giant city, and instead of like all the New Antioch forces being in New Antioch, they could be in Constantinople, you know? And then you could have your interesting like fifth faction, but I guess like that's too controversial nowadays or whatever. Even though it's alternate history. And like alternate history is meant to be wacky and funny and all this other shit, regardless of what people think of it. It's also grimdark too. But like I don't know. It's just to me, Trench Crusade has an interesting idea. Like, I don't hate the idea. I think it's interesting, like World War I, but like with demons and holy warriors and all this other stuff. I think that's interesting. But the way that it's executed just makes me feel like they're more interested in just like the random lore facts rather than the lore trying to make sense or the lore actually serving a purpose. Because I feel like lore can serve a purpose in your world as well as help expand it. And what the Trench Crusade staff did is the opposite of that, where they're just throwing random tidbits of lore out and it's not really expanding the world, it's just like adding more bullshit. Like, do you know that the Romanians have like vampires in their armies now? Because Vlad the Impaler was the inspiration for Dracula. Like, it sounds cool, but when you look at it from a logistical standpoint, why would like blood-sucking Romanian vampires be helping the Christians? Or like why would they even like how'd they even become vampires in the first place? It's never explained. Like I don't know. Like there's a good sense of I feel like there's a time and a place for good mystery, and then there's just making shit up for your setting. Not to mention the woke stuff of Trench Crusade. Okay, sorry about that. And like I said before, not a bad concept, just it's been so bogged down that I really don't feel like getting into it anymore. So if I'm gonna have to put in a tier, I'm gonna have to say D tier. At least it tried like Grimdark Future to be something unique. It's just that the developers cared more about preaching an idea than telling a good story, as well as doing all these lore shit and all this other stuff. Like I said before, if like conservative people did the same thing that Trench Crusade did, but with conservative politics, I'd have the same issue because I feel like a lot of people are gonna take me out of context and go, "Oh, you only hate like leftist politics because you're race or some shit like that. You know how they virtue signal and all this shit. But no, I just hate politics and fiction in general, and I feel like there's like a lot of like right wing creators I can name that do the same like shit. But I don't really have the same view. Like I don't like politics being in media in general, regardless if they're left wing, right wing, or whatever. Media should be media, okay? Like that's what these fans want. They don't want like only right-wing politics or only left-wing politics. We just want our media to not be so politically focused. You can tell a good political story, but that only works if you can tell a good political story. If you can't do that and your story has to rely on just preaching a narrative rather than giving us characters, giving us lore and all other stuff, then why the hell are we here? Sorry for the small little tangent I had. Um, But that's honestly probably a good video for the future, how and how not to do politics and media, which I probably will do in the future at some point. So let's move on from that little rant because you know for a fact that there's going to be at least one or two comments where people are going to try to straw man me on this issue, but whatever. This isn't what we're focusing on. We're focusing on good Warhammer 40K replacements, not politics. So moving on, we have Turnup 28. And to be honest, this is probably the best one out of all like the Warhammer's replacement settings. I love the lore. I love the goofiness of it. If you don't know what Turnip 28 is, imagine Napoleonic warfare combined with root vegetables and other crazy stuff with a Tim Burton slash Monty Python-esque feel and humor to it. And you'll kind of get what I'm talking about when I say like Turnip 28 is easily one of the best replacements. It's funny, it's goofy, and it's interesting, and I found out about it because the guy who does TTS, I forgot his well, I didn't forget his name. Hold on for a minute. Let me just
A few moments later.
Yeah, this guy, Bur Burvey Alt. But sorry for butchering his name. This guy who does the TTS stuff. I'll just throw his name up because I suck at pronouncing names. But he did a video on Turnip 28, which actually got me into it. And I do have some models, like they're not built yet, but like I'm gonna build them and I'm gonna paint them and all this other stuff. And I'm planning to kit bash into Turnip 28 models because that's how interested I am in this setting. Because I think it looks really creative and I think it looks really cool. And I think just like what I said about Firefight and Warzone Warpath being a better alternative to Grimdark Future, I feel like Turnip 28 is a better alternative in a way to Trench Crusade in a way, you know? Because unlike Trench Crusade, Turnip 28 has goofy, interesting lore, but it still serves a purpose and all this other stuff. For instance, like the root vegetable cults, like they're all silly and stuff. Like you got the Great Proboscis, which is like giant root elephants that they ride in the battle, like Lord of the Rings style, or like the cult of the Louse, I think that's what they're called, or the Uprising of the Louse, sorry, or like a bunch of like crazed like revolutionists who hunt down aristocrats, and eventually they just killed all the aristocrats in the world. So now they're just hunting down and prosecuting whoever they can find, essentially, to label aristocrats, sort of like angry mob, like witch hunter kind of stuff. They have a cool like Wicker Man that they have too in their faction, like that kind of stuff, but it serves the lore because it's showing like the other like cult alternatives to Sist and all this other stuff that you can run in a way. Whereas like the giant robot in Trench Crusade, like what's the point of it? Like you can't play it on the tabletop. It's not even mentioned in any other parts of the Trench Crusade lore other than the fact that it just exists. So like what's the point of having a giant robot, in the setting like Trench Crusade? And for that reason, I'm gonna have to put Turnip 28, and this is gonna be kind of controversial, but I don't really care. It's S tier for me, at least. An S tier product. I love it. Honestly, I could not see any flaws in it, although I guess the flaw is that it's mostly like grimdark fantasy with like a goofy vibe to it. So like if that's not for you, then nah, go somewhere else. But for me at least, I think it's a solid Warhammer replacement. I also have a playlist for Turnip 28 on my channel. So if you guys want to check that out, I would highly recommend checking it out and all the other stuff. And yeah. Anyways, Forever Winter. Forever Winter is probably, I'm gonna be honest, like another really good one because I really like it's a video game. It's a loot and shooter too, which I think I'd be very, very good at because I've played games like Fallout and Outer Worlds before, and let's just say I loved collecting loot in that game. So I think I would do pretty well in Forever Winter in terms of like looting and stuff. Although I have heard that Forever Winter is kind of challenging because of the water system and the fact that the gameplay kind of bugs out. I do think the lore is still like 1,000 times more interesting than like modern 40K lore. Because essentially it takes place in this futuristic, like dystopian, grim, dark nightmare world where like you have these three different like factions fighting each other: Europa, Eurasia, and Euraska, who are just like sort of crazy, like grim, dark sci-fi parodies of, well, real world nations. Like Europa's a parody of Western nations, but they have like large guns and their technology isn't really advanced as the other two, but they're still like in the game. They have like numbers and stuff. They're kind of like the Imperial Guard in a ways, in like that they rely more on manpower than they do like firepower. They're sort of like qu- quality over quantity, if you know what I mean. You have Eurasia, who are like probably the most technologically advanced in the setting. They're essentially a parody of like Asian countries and like you could say like China and all this other stuff. But they're more like a run by like corporations and stuff who turn people into cyborgs, which I thought was very interesting and very like gritty. Like imagine like winning, because in the lore it's stated like They sort of win lotteries to become cyborgs. I don't think it stayed in the lore, but I think it's just the theory that most people came up with. But even then, it's still like interesting because imagine just chilling at your house in like a Eurasian like biodome and finding out like, oh shit, I've been selected by my government for some specific purpose. Then you get turned into a cyborg, you're crammed inside of a bomber plane, you get flown like halfway across the ocean to this alien country, and you're just dropped out like a bomb, like onto the battlefield where now you're forced to like rip apart and attack whoever you see. Because your mind's probably like so like degenerate, like feralized by like you becoming a cyborg, or you're like so mentally broken by it, like, you know. And yes, Eurasia has a weird Mechanicus thing going on as well, where like they believe the flesh is weak and that they're gonna be cyborgs. So I found that also a little bit interesting. And then you have Euraska, which is probably the most batshit insane of the three. Because yeah, it's got a lot of like parallels to Russia and like other Eastern European countries, but they're not only an ally to Eurasia, but they're also kind of more like insane, more crazier than them, because the shit that Euraska creates is like horrific genetic abominations or cybernetic monstrosities. Kind of like they're just insane. Like the Orgamex, these 8 foot tall, like bruiser monstrosities who are like these super soldiers turned into like walking tanks in a way. They kind of remind me of those guys from Wolfenstein. You know what I mean? And all the other stuff. The grabbers, like robot dogs with human faces on them, they were created to, well, to ambush and grab people. And they also just look terrifying with their bird talon kind of like claws, and the fact that I've seen like gameplay footage of people playing the game just to get the feel of it. And every single time there was a grabber around, you'd hear a mechanical like galloping across the halls, and you'd see it walk in the one room and walk in the other as the guy's hiding. And I'm like, holy shit, like imagining me in that situation, I'd be panicking as all hell. But yeah, and essentially like they're in a three-way war. And the best part about Forever Winter is you're none of those factions. You're just a tiny little scavenger guy looking for resources to, you know, steal and bring back to your little underground settlement. Which I kind of like more about Forever Winter, because in 40K, like humanity's still part of one massive imperium, whereas like Forever Winter, you're just like this survivor kind of guy trying to survive like this post-apocalyptic grimdark nightmare. And rather than surviving zombies, you're surviving like the horrors of humanity, if you will. Sort of like The Last of Us meets Animatrix, grim, like grim dark stuff, and Children of Man, all wrapped up into one survival horror loot and shooter. And you kind of got Forever Winter, which I think is fucking awesome. So, with that being said, I'm gonna have to put Forever Winter in an S tier. Why? Because, well, I think it's awesome, in my opinion. Like, just an interesting setting with interesting character, with interesting lore an interesting grimdark story, and it's definitely a video game I would love to check out. Unfortunately, I do not have Steam, so I cannot get it. But if I ever get Steam, then guess what's the first thing I'm buying on Steam? That's Forever Winter. But overall, I think it's a solid Warhammer 40K replacement. It has a lot of those grimdark vibes and details that people have been craving, and it's essentially just like French Crusade but 1,000 times better. So it's definitely up there in S tier for me. S tier Warhammer 40K replacement. BattleTech. I've heard about this one. From what I've heard, it's kind of like, well, it's about mechs, like war mechs and all this other stuff, but like in space, and they battle each other and all this other stuff. So, and like from the lore I've seen of it, it's kind of like very Dune. Like if you took like the politics of Dune with all the houses and stuff, but replaced them with like mech warriors. So I guess they're kind of similar to night houses, but if that was the whole setting's aesthetic. And I think it goes hard. There's some like mechs that I like and some mechs that I don't like, but hey, it looks interesting. Although I guess if we're gonna talk about the same problem that Trench Crusade has, the team behind BattleTech is also kind of politically crazy. and also cares way more about shoving political agendas down people's throats than actually giving us an interesting story or talking about interesting characters, you know? So I think I'd kind of have to downgrade it based on that. And I guess like there isn't like a lot of like crazy grimdark stuff happening in BattleTech, so I'm gonna have to also downgrade it for those kinds of reasons too, because of the reasons that we're getting into grimdark stuff or getting into Warhammer replacements is because of grimdark stuff, right? We want grimdark dystopian settings, or at least that's what I want, because I've been getting into grimdark stuff like a lot recently. So I think BattleTech is going to have to go in. I don't want to put it in an F tier or D tier, so I think I'll just keep it at C tier with Age of Sigmar. Like, it's fine for what it is, but with the crazy like political natures of like the company, I don't know the BattleTech company's name, but I've seen videos about like the controversy, like an Arch video on it, and the fact that the company is also like fired like a lot of their people over the dumbest shit too. It's like being a part of another GW, if you will. But I guess with this GW, they don't go as far as to like ban 40K animations. Also, I guess another side note, a BattleTech YouTuber got sued by GW for using the name Warhammer, even though the Warhammer mech was like an actual like name of one of the mechs in BattleTech. So I guess you're not safe from GW's wrath in BattleTech anyway. But I mean, GW will literally sue anyone and anything that uses like a name that slightly resembles something from their setting. So like if I made an animated series about wolves and I entitled it Space Wolves, then GW would probably sue the shit out of my ass because lo and behold, there's a faction in Warhammer called the Space Wolves. And let's just say GW does not like it when people use stuff from their IPs to essentially, well, not milk them, but like make their own content with them because GW can't share, you know? But hey, that's why we're here. We're picking out settings that you don't have to worry about GW's wrath anymore. So I guess on to the next one. Project Morningstar. No, not the Hell of a Boss character. I mean the Hazbin Hotel character, sorry. We're talking about a sci-fi setting that exists here on YouTube called Project Morningstar. Now, I actually encountered this setting thanks to a little YouTuber by the name of Nelub, who I think you should subscribe to because he's a really good 40K YouTuber. And this video on Project Morningstar actually inspired me to make this list. But I honestly think that Project Morningstar is probably one of the most interesting ones, in my opinion. Like, it's got a lot of interesting lore and intricate lore into it. It essentially takes place in a hyper advanced space empire called the Hegemons. Hegemon of something, but I know it's called the Hegemons. I know I'm gonna get like obliterated in the comments for forgetting that. But they're essentially this massive space corporatocracy, which you probably don't know what a corporatocracy is. Essentially, you know, in Wall-E, where they're on that giant ship called the Axiom, and there's just like corporate stuff everywhere, or like the Lorax films, or like Outer Worlds. Like, basically, corporatocracies are societies that are run and owned by mega corporations. Something that I feel like is more relevant nowadays than any other form of like fictional media I feel like people see and all this other stuff because like you know corporations have done a lot of bad things to our society and it's kind of showing its mark. I mean, we're talking about GW right now in this video and the bad things that they do to their fans. So, as you can imagine, a setting where this big all-consuming corporate entity controls the stars is just horrifying in my opinion. Also, I think they could be a little bit of a monarchy too, because they mentioned like families and stuff. So I'm thinking like a corporatocracy slash monarchy kind of society that I view the hegemon as. But who knows? I'm gonna have to probably dig more and more into like the lore of Project Morningstar just to get like myself a grip. I might do a lore video on Project Morningstar in the future. So if that would be interesting, um, I would happily do that. Make sure I write a script down and everything for it. But one of the reasons why I like Project Morningstar, and I still do, like I said before, I'm gonna do a video on it in the future because I find it interesting. but it just looks like such an interesting setting, and I feel like dystopian corporations, I mean, dystopian settings where mega corporations run like everything to the point where like it becomes very dystopian and very gritty is very, very interesting. Moving on, there's also like the various factions you can play as. Play as. There's the various factions that exist in the lore, like the Brachian Elite. I think that's what they're called. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it or any of that stuff. But the Brachian Elite, they're kind of like a lot of people compare them to Space Marines, but they give me more Wolf Brigade vibes, if that makes any sense. They're essentially just this elite group of soldiers who work for the Hegemon, and essentially when a system or a group of aliens becomes way too rowdy for the Hegemons, they just send these guys in to clean up the mess, and you'll see that in the animations for Project Morningstar. There's also like a various other like alien species that exist in the world of Project Morningstar. There's the Exogen, I think that's what they're called. They look like a cross between like the elites from Halo and the Fallen from Destiny in a ways. Except their lore is like that they come from this planet that they've migrated from, and now they're basically causing problems across the system, essentially. They're very interesting. I find their lore interesting, and they're also in the animations fighting against the Brachians, if you will. And the Brachians elites are just responding by slaughtering the absolute shit out of them. And then you have the Unionists, who are, well, they're just Hassan Piker fans in space, if I'm gonna be honest. Like, they are like the rebels, but like with more of a communist vibe to them. Overall, Project Morningstar is interesting. I like it. I'm interested in it. And overall, this is probably going to go in an S tier again. I just noticed that we have no A tier though. So, in terms of that, I'm going to probably put it in an A tier. It's still a pretty good setting, and I highly recommend checking out their YouTube channel. Or, like I said, for Forever Winter and Turn Up 28, I have a playlist about that setting too. So, if you want to check out my Project Morningstar playlist. I most like videos that give a lot of information on it, as well as like a lot of videos from the YouTube channel. But I'd honestly recommend checking out their YouTube channel more because their YouTube channel is just interesting, filled with lore. And I feel like the YouTube channel would do a way better job at getting you into the world of Project Morningstar than I am talking about it. So yeah, go and check it out. Okay, next up. This one's kind of a joke one, but we have Adam Somethings um setting. So if you don't know, Adam Something was going to make a setting for was going to make his own Grimdark setting, if you will. Or war game, sorry, not Grimdark setting, war game setting. And this war game was going to be um how do I put this? All the factions were going to get along, and there was going to be no fighting for some reason, even though it's a war game or something like that. I don't know if he's going to make it like World War II kind of, where like you have all the good righteous factions versus like an evil like one like fascist faction or whatever, or if it's just genuinely just gonna be a Star Trekian war game, which if that's the case, I don't think Adam Something understands like war games. Now, I've already criticized this man in the past. More specifically, I made a video where I essentially tried debunking his claims that Warhammer 40K was this alt-right like center or something like that. I really don't care anymore about that kind of stuff because I'm something's just like a loser. Well, not a loser, but like he made a really just stupid video and he's just one of those like wannabe bread tubers, who just says shit and thinks that they can get away with it. And yet, lo and behold, when people call them out on their bullshit, they play victim and all this other stuff. He's just one of those kinds of bread tuber people. So I can imagine this war game just being absolute dog shit. And with that being said, Adam Something's war game is going in F tier. I'm sorry, but if your only focus for a war game is just to make it your political battleground, then once again, I am not interested. You can have politics in your settings like Oddworld does and Dishonored does, and I love those games, but they have to have a story and all the other stuff into them. And knowing Adam Something, I don't feel like he's going to give us any of that. Okay, and we have our final setting of the day, Space King. So if you don't know what Space King is, it's kind of an animated YouTube series, kind of like Hazbin Hotel or My Pride. Ugh. But unlike those settings, Space King takes a like a lot of inspiration from 40K. It's kind of like more of a parody to 40K rather than a ripoff, which I appreciate way more than what Grimdark Future does with its stuff. But it's like still its own like original thing at the end of the day. Like it's still like creating more original things. It focuses more on aliens than it does demons, which I appreciate a lot more because it's being more sci-fi and all this other stuff. And I think I like 40K more when the Imperial Man's fighting aliens instead of demons, you know? So Space King is made by the guys who or is made by Flashgits, which if you don't know what Flashgits is, these are the same guys who made Racist Mario. And if you know anything about Racist Mario, the edgy YouTube animation that came out way back when, you know that it's infamous for a specific kind of reason, if you know what I mean. And Flash gets turns out they're big Warhammer fans, and they decided to create their own animated series called Space King. And I honestly think it is really, really enjoyable. Like, the humor's funny, the parody work is funny, and a lot of Warhammer 40K fans really enjoy this setting. So I know for a fact that I and most other Warhammer 40K fans looking for a replacement is going to enjoy this one. There's only 2 episodes out so far, but they've planned to make way, way more, which is if that is the case, I'm hoping for more. And to be honest, I find it like I said before, 1,000 times better than Hell of a Boss and My Pride, because unlike those animated series, let's just say Space King would make them look tame. Like Hazbin Hotels, like everyone likes to say it's edgy because it swears a lot and all this other stuff. Same thing with My Pride and the whole child murder. Like some of the jokes that Space King makes and all this other stuff are really like raunchy and all this other stuff. And it's the kind of thing that I could see some sensitive little snowflakes getting offended by like instantly. Whereas like if you're a person who wants to like see like kind of the more raunchier side of an animated series that doesn't hold back, then Space King's pretty good. Also, it's also a good like 40K replacement as well. Also one more positive is the fact that Hate Monger is a character that exists. I do not care. He's the best character in Space King. Also, he's not gay. Just making sure. But overall, I love this thing so much, and it's probably one of the only times where I'd say I watched a YouTube animated series and actually got some enjoyment out of it. So yeah, this is an S tier for me. S tier the Space King. And that's all my rankings of these Warhammer 40K replacements that I found. Obviously, there are probably a lot more out there and a lot more that you guys probably know of. And if that is the case, please give a comment below on a interesting Warhammer 40K replacement that you think I missed, and maybe I'll check it out. Well, I say maybe, I'll probably will check it out because I'm just interested. But these are the ones that I could find, and basically I've ranked them from worst to best. So let's go through what we've discussed, basically. In F tier, you got Grimdark Future and Adam Something's little war game. Like I said before, these two settings I feel like did the bare minimum of getting me invested or interested into their settings at all, and I honestly want nothing to do with them. B tier is Trench Crusade. Like I said before, I don't 100% hate Trench Crusade. In fact, there was a time that I actually liked it. It's just a shame that's been so boggled down by the people who made it that it's become like this, it's sort of stained its reputation, if you will, to becoming something great. In C tier, we got Warhammer Age of Sigmar and Battletech. Like I said before, interesting settings with unique models and characters and all this sort of stuff. It's just that the lore is kind of whatever, and the companies that run them are also equally as malicious. Well, I mean, one is literally one run by GW, the other one's run by a company that wants to be the next GW. So I'm gonna put them in C tier. They're not as unlike interesting as the other ones, but I could see better. B tier, we got Warhammer Fantasy and Dead Zone. Like I said before, really good settings, really interesting settings. It's just that, like, in terms of Warhammer 40k replacements, there's not really much there, I guess. And they're not really like, I like them, but like not as much as like the other settings, if you will. And besides, some of like Warhammer Fantasies pretty much had its dark days, like Warhammer 40k, and Dead Zone is fun and all this other stuff, but like I said before, the rules sound way too complicated for me. And I mean, playing Warhammer is already complicated enough, so playing a game that's like, oh hey, you like the complicatedness of Warhammer? Well, let's make it 1,000 times more complicated. Is just like, nah. A tier Project Morningstar, like I said before, the only reason I put this in A tier is because I noticed that we had no slots for A tier. So I just thought, yeah, I'll put it there, but it would have likely been an S tier as well. Like I said before, Project Morningstar is probably the best one to get into, as they have a website as well as a YouTube channel that you can get for free. I forgot to mention the website, but they have a website that you can just go on and like read off the lore. They have comics there, they have everything there. It's amazing, honestly. So, with that being said, I think Project Morningstar is a pretty good replacement, and it honestly deserves to be checked out and is probably one of the best like Warhammer replacements out there. And of course, in S tier, we have Turn of 28, Forever Winter, and Space King. The three greatest Warhammer 40k replacements to ever exist, and the ones that I would consider to be the best. So those are essentially my four horsemen of the good Warhammer 40k replacements. These being Tournament 28, Forever Winter, Space King, and Project Morningstar. And the others are either just okay or just extremely bad, in my opinion. But those are my replacements. Like I said before, if you like this video, please subscribe. If you thought this video was cool, maybe share it with a friend or whatever. And also like this video as well if you also enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time. And this is essentially my video. I don't know how I'm going to end this off, other than the fact that I hope you have a nice day. And hopefully, this video made you think about the other possibilities out there for Warhammer 40k replacements, you know? Because it's always nice to see somebody getting into something that they've never gotten into before and getting invested into it. Anyways, I'm the Behooded Files, signing out.